The coronavirus has brought about many entrepreneurs, people who are doing side hustles, or people who are actually already business owners, small business owners. And what we're going to talk about today are 5 legal mistakes, common legal mistakes that small business owners make. Before I get into it, I want you to check out the t-shirt, 9 to 5 with the hustle on the side. If you watch my other video, how to get out of a rut during quarantine, you know that 89 Threads, which is a small business, actually features a lot of t-shirts, have inspirational things that might reflect your lifestyle. I'm gonna drop a link in the description box so you can check it out later. We're gonna talk about 5 legal mistakes that small business owners make. Some of you may not even know you're making these mistakes. These can be costly mistakes, and we wanna help you out today. Joining us today on TXT Tells All is New York-based attorney Dorcia Carrillo. Welcome to TXT Tells All, Dorcia.
LaRita, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here so we can share all the information with our small business owners and our hustlers out there. But before we jump into it, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been practicing law.
Sure. So again, my name is Dorcia Carrillo, and I run the law office of Dorcia Carrillo. It's based in White Plains, New York. I do serve clients throughout the New York state area and even beyond New York, but my office is based in New York, and I'm a New York admitted attorney. I focus on technology transactions. So for companies that produce technology products and they have commercialized and are starting to sell it, especially to enterprises, I help negotiate those transactions and anything adjacent to that. And also if you're on the consumer side as an enterprise business or even as a small business and you consume technology products and services, I help negotiate those transactions. For example, if you are running an office and you have a managed service provider that manages your IT systems, there's probably an agreement in place and I could help with something like that. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. When I started my practice, I came from Sikorsky Aircraft, which is a helicopter manufacturer, and I was actually working in the international trade compliance department. So I have some experience in international transactions, and I still handle a little bit of that, but my passion is really helping small businesses.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. I know the quarantine has brought about everybody's creative spirits, and so I kind of want to give people a heads up, say, hey, these are things that you should consider if you're going to be a small business owner. Some people don't always put on their legal hat or know that they should be consulting an attorney. So I'm glad that you're here to talk to us about some of those mistakes that some people make. So let's get into it. The first mistake we have here is not reviewing contracts or paying someone to review your contracts. And I know I've gotten phone calls from people that want to review contracts when they're trying to consider a deal. So what would you say about that? Is it worth it to pay someone to review a contract? Kind of what contracts do you think that small business owners should feel comfortable getting into, or should they be okay with kind of doing a legal Zoom? Kind of give us an idea of some mistakes that you've seen, I guess, in your experience.
So one thing that is important is to read anything you're signing, anything you're clicking through, anything that is going to bind you legally. And if you need help with that, because some of these things are long and wordy and complicated and you might not understand them, or if you're in a situation where you can negotiate them, you might not feel that comfortable negotiating it on your own. I say, and I'm an attorney, so it makes sense. Of course, I think it's worthwhile to speak to an attorney, especially when you're dealing with data rights. If you're providing data to a service provider, making sure that you understand how they're going to treat that data. And you always want to understand payment terms. A lot of people get caught up with those free trials, even business owners, understanding when that trial ends, what you have to do to get out of it. So it's always going to be my recommendation to, at the very least, read the contract and have an understanding of it. If you don't have an understanding of it, you probably want to talk to an attorney. It's worthwhile to ask an attorney, especially an attorney who understands contracts, because attorneys do lots of different things and not every attorney understands provisions of an agreement and how they can affect you.
Okay. Well, that's a good tip. I know contracts come up in, like you said, just about everything you encounter in life, not just even small businesses. So read what you're going to sign before you sign it, or consult with someone so they can help you understand what you're actually signing. So that's a good tip. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is not protecting your intellectual property. This is a big one, especially for people who are trying to, I guess, create apps or create ideas for apps, or just an idea that you feel like, oh, this is something that I feel will benefit a lot of people. They don't protect their intellectual property. So what would you say in response to someone who, I guess, hasn't protected their intellectual property, and what ways can they actually protect it?
That's an excellent point. And intellectual property, one, just to be clear, it's intellectual property is intangible property. So you might have real property, real estate, houses, land, that sort of thing. In the same way you'd protect those things, you want to protect your intellectual property, which can be protected with, first of all, identifying it, knowing what you have within that scope of intellectual property. And I really recommend working with an attorney who specializes in intellectual property, because it's a whole special area of law. And especially if you're looking for patents, you need an attorney who can go before the patent bar, and that's a federal registration process. So you'll need to have someone who has that understanding. As far as protecting your intellectual property, what are some of the tools? What are some of the ways? Well, something that's pretty easy when you're working with collaborators, vendors, any other party, and you're going to be sharing intellectual property or confidential information, which isn't always, confidential information. You can define what that is in an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. So you define what it is, and then the parties will agree on how they're going to treat each other's intellectual property, because oftentimes it's not just one party providing confidential information or intellectual property. Both parties are exchanging it. And so an NDA is a pretty straightforward document, shouldn't be highly negotiated, because both parties should be agreeing to the same things. And so that's one way from the outset to protect intellectual property in any sort of business arrangement.
Right, that's good. I know recently somebody came out with an idea where you have the little ring behind your phone so you can prop up your phone. Like that simple idea is an idea that they, I'm sure, had to protect, because now it's being duplicated all over. But it was somebody's idea, and they want to protect that idea so they can benefit from it, revenue, profit-wise. And so if you come up with something that you think is important and that you think is marketable, protect it in multiple ways. And like you said, consult with an intellectual property attorney so that you can figure out, how to protect it. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. Yeah, because, and there are a lot of different considerations with intellectual property now. And again, especially with patents, as I said, I worked for divisions of United Technologies, and patents are a huge part of their portfolio of assets, because they design aircraft parts, and even, smaller subparts, subsystems, all of that stuff. These all impact different patents. And so sometimes people think they have something that they can patent, and surprisingly, it's not patentable. So it's always good to have that conversation with someone who understands how patents, how trademarks, how copyrights, all of those forms of protection for intellectual property, how those work. Now, once you have those and you're ready to commercialize it, and you have a patent, you have you have a trademark or something, and you're going to license it, that's where I really help.
Okay, well, that's good stuff. So we'll go to the right spot. All right, so let's jump into number 3 on the list, and that's not forming proper legal entity, or just, I guess, forming the proper kind of entity when you want to protect yourself as a company. And so I guess from a legal perspective, when you go out into business, what are some ways that you can protect yourself, I guess, you personally, from whatever happens with your business?
Great question again. These are great questions, great tips. So one thing to note when you are side hustling or starting a side business, if you are doing it all in your name, then you're opening up yourself, like Dorcia Carrillo, opening myself up to liability for whatever business I've started. So 83 threads, you said? 89
threads?
89 threads should be a separate entity from whomever, and it could be multiple people, whomever is running the company. So it could be a limited liability company. A lot of people say LLC for limited liability corporation, but it's a limited liability company. So a corporation is a separate entity. You have shareholders, you'll have bylaws, and that's one way to protect the individual person or people.
Okay.
Limited liability company, LLC, that's another entity, another way to protect the people. And with a limited liability company, you'll have an operating agreement that's going to determine the way the members, the owners of the LLC operate within, with each other, what their ownership stake is, management responsibilities, nature of the business, those sorts of things. And then you can have a partnership, limited partnership, you could be a nonprofit. So there are different entities. Entities are controlled on the state level. So you'll file your registration forms with the state in which you're going to do business. Often if you're doing business across states, you might have to file foreign corporations. So not foreign like out of the country, but just foreign from another state. You'll have to have some sort of filing for that. And created an entity doesn't mean that you're totally protected. You have to manage that entity. So again, for example, LLCs, you want to make sure that you actually have an operating agreement in place and that you're in compliance with that operating agreement. So if it's voting, so those sorts of things are where you really want to talk to an attorney to understand all of the obligations for the administration and management of the entity. And then on top of protecting yourself through establishing a separate business entity, business insurance. Even if you're a sole proprietor, meaning that you're just operating in your name, you might have a DBA. A lot of people are sole proprietors and they have a doing business as. You can get coverage with business insurance. And that way, if you are sued, in an unfortunate event you are sued, your insurance coverage should be able to kick in and protect your assets. Like if you own a home, or if you own anything. Cars, and exactly anything that is going to that's not lien proof or judgment proof. But those are the main ways people protect themselves.
Okay, I didn't even think about business insurance, so I'm glad you brought that up. We're getting some good tips, so hopefully you guys are listening and taking some notes and are gonna reach out to Dorcia after you watch this video. So the fourth tip is not being aware of non-compete agreements / non-solicitation agreements. So if you have a side hustle, this is for people, I guess, who have side hustles, can your boss prevent you from doing business? Or can the skills you use from your current job be branched out to your side hustle business? Is there anything that says you can or cannot do it?
If you have a side hustle, let's say you're an engineer by day and you work for Sikorsky Aircraft, right? If you have signed an employment agreement that says you cannot have and it wouldn't say side hustle, but maybe moonlighting or some sort of restrictive provision in any sort of employment agreement, you want to make sure that you're not running afoul of that. Companies might not often enforce them because they might not often find out about them, but I wouldn't put it past anyone, especially in an environment where companies are looking to generate revenue or to protect their assets. You want to make sure that you've done what you signed up to do. And so if you do have an employment agreement that says you can't do A, B, and C, you can, and it doesn't say you can't do C, so maybe your side hustle becomes C. Or maybe you renegotiate and leverage your time as an employee, your value you've added to the company, and explain how this side hustle isn't going to affect your performance. So of course, if you do that and you've negotiated, make sure that the side hustle doesn't affect your performance at your current job, especially if the side hustle isn't providing you the revenue that can support your lifestyle. You want to make sure you're protecting that revenue, that salary that does support your lifestyle. And one other thing just to note, it's, again, taking a conservative position, people might not actually do this, but as an attorney, it behooves me to advise. If you are working on a side hustle, you want to be sure that you're working on that side hustle outside of the hours of your day job. Don't get fired. Exactly. It's just a way to not get fired.
Good points. And I'm glad you pointed out as far as the specifics, because let's say you are an engineer by day and then you want to start a side hustle as like a chef. That has nothing to do with what you do as an engineer. So that may be okay. You may not run afoul of trying to violate the agreement because you're not necessarily competing with by starting a side hustle that also does engineering. Point. So I'm glad that you pointed that out as far as make sure you know the specifics, because your side hustle business may not even be the same thing that you do by day, your 9-to-5 job. You might be doing something like what you're really passionate about, and you just have this other job right now to kind of pay the bills. So I'm glad you made that distinction.
That's what a lot of people do. They have something that pays the bills, but they're more passionate about something else. So that's usually going to be okay. But again, even if if you're a chef on the side, you want to make sure that when you're supposed to be in a meeting, you're not prepping your your collards or your chicken or whatever it is that you're cooking up, right? So being mindful of those boundaries. And then I've worked with a client where her side hustle is related to her day job, and so there was a potential conflict of interest, and I'm glad that she came to me, because I said, there's a potential, so all we have to do is go to your employer and let them know you're reading it this way, and then ask for the permission, ask for a modification to the agreement that you have in place with your employer if necessary. And, I want my clients to ask me those questions rather than try to figure it out on their own.
Mm-hmm. And so you didn't have to fix any problems for her after she ran afoul of it. You kind of, were proactive in trying to deal with the problems.
Right.
So that's good.
Because it's more expensive to fix those problems than it is to prevent them.
Right. And we're trying to give you tips, like these 5 tips that we're talking about, is so that you don't have to pay some costly fine or run into something that costs you on the back end because you didn't do what you could on the front end to kind of, protect yourself. So that's kind of what we're talking about, these 5 tips for you small business owners.
Yes.
So the last one, number 5, is not defining business relationships. So the difference between an independent contractor versus an employer. There's a legal difference between being an employee or having employees versus someone who works for you that's an independent contractor as far as your legal obligations over each one. So can you kind of break that down for the audience and tell us kind of why is it important to even have the distinction between you employ people as part of your business, your small business?
Sure. So I'm going to tell a little story to illustrate how this is important. And then also this will make the point about using the online tools and resources for your contracts. I was working with a friend approached me that her daughter was looking to, her daughter and a group of college friends wanted to work for my friend's company. And so my friend was going to hire them as unpaid interns. And she presented me with the agreement that she had in place, it was a collaboration agreement.
Okay.
So on its face, even on its face, the agreement was sort of poorly drafted.
Okay.
But, every attorney has their own preference for drafting.
Right.
The issue with the agreement, the greater issue was that in order to have unpaid interns in this, her company is based in New Jersey, and to have unpaid interns, there has to be a certain structure. Like you have to be providing the interns with an educational opportunity.
Okay.
And they can't do menial work. There are all of these regulations around that, which makes sense because we have laws to protect certain workers, certain classes of workers, and particularly when you're talking about unpaid workers.
Right.
And so when I talked to her and asked if she had some sort of program in place to be in compliance with these regulations, she didn't even realize that was the case. So the agreement she pulled from, I won't say which source, but she had some online source that she subscribed to, and she had pulled this agreement. And so the point of this story is, one, unpaid work should always be a red flag, like slow down, make sure that you understand what would be required if you're hiring people and not paying them. Right. And then 2, when you're using online resources, you have to have confidence that the information you're putting in is going to be the correct information that's going to provide the correct output. So in this case, she didn't. She was looking at it from a collaboration standpoint, and there was more to it than just collaborating. And then additionally, with small business owners and their employees, or whether they're independent contractors or employees, there are going to be tax implications. So when it comes to finer employment matters, like, okay, I have someone and they kind of work for me, but they kind of don't because they have their, they have their own business, but I'm not hiring their business, I'm hiring them as an individual. All of those things, like, I'm happy to take a first pass at those things. And as I said, I've helped a friend and I've helped a few other clients with independent contractor agreements. But then when you get into those finer employment matters and you do have employees, and especially, something like COVID-19, if you have employees, now there were regulations and laws about furloughing versus laying off and those sort of things. You probably want to talk to an employment lawyer. And again, there are also tax implications for who you hire versus who you just have as a vendor or service provider. So you'll want to look at it from a full scope of it.
Okay, those are good points. I know personally, I had a nanny for my son, and I was at that point I was considered a household employer, which means I had to pay federal taxes. I had to take out taxes for her, and even when I've had to pay for kind of work insurance, and if something happened, to protect her. And then even when this COVID happened, it implicated a lot of things in saying whether she was an employee or not, or whether she was an independent contractor. And so something simple as like hiring somebody, I think in the state of Texas, if you end up paying a babysitter or a nanny more than X amount of money, or even like a housekeeper, X amount of money for the year, then you're considered a household employer. And it brings on other implications that I didn't even know were there. And so I discovered it as I went along the way, and made sure I protect myself, make sure I had an employer contract with her, and make sure I had the taxes taken out through a payroll service so that I was doing everything correctly. But I wanted to make sure I was protected, and I also wanted to make sure she was protected because it was, protection for both ends. So it's important to kind of know the distinction as far as whether it's an independent contractor or an employer-employee situation. So I'm glad you kind of make the distinction.
And that's a great point, because you also brought up with that being in Texas. Now, again, I handle technology transactions. I take a look at general employment matters, but that doesn't sound like that household employer. It's not anything I'm familiar with being the case in New York. So all of these things are always going to be very fact specific, and law is based on, the law is applied to factual situations, and facts always vary. That's why it's important to not just rely on, an online resource, especially a free resource that's not customized to you, because it's just going to be generic, and you need specialized custom help when you're dealing with contracts, especially, but any sort of legal requirement. So that was a good point about Texas.
Right. We wanted to put together these 5 tips to hopefully help our audience and let them know that, hey, these are things that you should be aware of to try to save you money, to save you time, to save you a headache, and also to, if you didn't know that you can actually monetize some of your ideas, these are ways that you can protect your ideas. So it's not just about losing money, it's about you perhaps can make money as well in this situation. So thank you, Dorcia, for joining us today. Tell our viewers how they can reach you after watching this video, if they want to reach out to you for any kind of business consultations.
Sure. So please follow my law office of Dorcia Carrillo, on Instagram. I try to post helpful information and sometimes videos there. On LinkedIn, I'm happy to connect with people as well. Again, Dorcia Carrillo, I know you'll have that in the description. There are 2 R's, 2 L's, but I'm pretty easy to find online. My firm has a website, dorciacarrillo.com, and those are the 3 best ways to get in contact with me.
Okay. So now the viewers know how they can reach you on LinkedIn, Instagram, and your website. Is there anything that you're promoting right now, anything new going on in your business?
One thing I do want to plug, I'm piloting a program where it's like, I haven't come up with a name for it, but giving consumers the opportunity, potential clients the opportunity to have a fixed rate for a certain number of months. And I'm thinking like $200 a month, you can call me with all of your questions, because sometimes it's not so much that you need an agreement drafted or anything like that, but you just need to run something by an attorney,
Right.
and you can call your attorney. So I'm working on rolling that out. If anyone's interested, I'd love to get some feedback so I have an understanding of what the market wants.
Okay, so that's great news. So TXC viewers, contact Dorcia. There's many ways you can contact her. Hopefully you guys take advantage of the tips that we gave you today and reach out to Dorcia if you have any further questions. She's more familiar in this field than I am, and I'm glad she was gracious enough to join us on TXC Tells All. Check out the description box for all the details about the shirt from 89 Threads and Dorcia's information about how you can reach her as well.